What a shock it was to wake up and see that your property is on the front page of the paper as the property where they're going to put the exchange right through your house where you've lived for 41 years.
No, it's wrong. It's wrong. Not just for me, but for every one of the people, my neighbors down the street.
We didn't come for much, so to have actually gotten this and have, your own spot in the barn and stuff you just never thought you'd have, it sucks to know that can be gone. I just want them to see that there are a lot of people that care, a lot of people that worked hard for their place. Some people have had the land for 50 plus years, it's been passed down, and mine's not that. We've been out there for almost 7 years, and so I haven't had it through the family, but it's exactly what I want. And I just want them to see there are people that care, that it's a big deal to them to lose this.
Yeah, Abby, and their message was pretty clear-cut. They don't want this extension. One woman we spoke with who is at the Capitol today says she fears losing her home, a home she built for her family.
I built my dream home to die, even for my kids. I've been out there 18 years, and it's sad. It's a sad deal.
Carol Soto heartbroken, but knew she wanted to be at the Capitol today.
Do away with it. There's so many people. It's not a rooftop. There's people's homes. It's not a farmland. It's people's homes. People live out there.
This was the scene inside the rotunda. Dozens of people holding signs and voicing their opposition to this road project that is part of Access Oklahoma, a statewide multi-billion-dollar plan to improve road conditions and travel time. It's something many local leaders and state leaders, including the state's transportation secretary, are excited about.
You don't attract businesses to the state of Oklahoma unless you're investing aggressively in infrastructure to support the types of things they're going to need and the opportunities they're going to need for the future.
But some residents in Cleveland County want nothing to do with the expansion. Pan Groom organized today's rally because several of her neighbors could lose their home and property.
I want to stop the turnpike completely. It's just not needed. It's not necessary. It'll cause death and destruction everywhere it is.
We reached out to the Turnpike Authority following today's rally here at the Capitol. They responded to us and sent us a statement. A spokesperson sent us a statement saying they've received tremendous feedback and they look forward to continued engagement throughout this process. The authority says they will hold several meetings in Norman and more to speak with residents over the next month, that being April, the month of April. Reporting live at the Capitol, I'm Andy Weber, KOCO 5 News.
Turmoil tonight surrounding that proposed plan to expand. It's a story we've been telling you about for weeks. The Oklahoma Turnpike Authority proposing a new turnpike along Indian Hills Road, one that would connect Newcastle to Norman. They're also wanting to extend the Kickapoo Turnpike west of Lake Thunderbird, essentially connecting the Kickapoo Turnpike to Purcell. Standing in the way of that proposal, though, is an estimated 600 homes. One of them belonging to a widow who says the turnpike will, at most, leave her without her beloved home or severely devalue it at best. News 4's Kaitor K with this story.
Tonight, Tassie Hirschfeld invited us to her home in Norman and showed us how the turnpike would be built just a quarter-mile away from her house. And her home has deep sentimental value because it was custom designed by her late husband.
Who wants to buy a home next to a highway?
That's Tassie Hirschfeld telling News 4 about how the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority's controversial turnpike expansion plan would devalue her property severely. She lives near Southeast 84th Avenue in Cedar Lane.
Because the current path, it will be right there. I mean, literally, my neighbor's house is in the eminent domain zone, and so instead of the peaceful nature you see, it'll be semi-trucks and traffic and pollution and bright lights right there.
Hirschfeld says she'd likely have to move to regain peace in her life, and that this is about more than just money, but about losing a home precious to her heart, one her late husband custom designed before dying of dementia.
It just feels like losing him all over again, but in an even worse way than I could have imagined.
She also fears that an adjustment of the turnpike's path could potentially put her in the eminent domain zone, where dozens, if not hundreds, of homes now sit. She says the OTA has put a hard pause on all of their lives.
They're holding our homes hostage because we can't make life decisions, we can't make plans, we can't think about selling or moving because there's just so much uncertainty.
Earlier this week, the Norman City Council passed a resolution expressing their opposition to the expansion. The OTA says they'll be holding several public meetings in the impacted areas to get input from local property owners.
My name is Inger Jufrida, that's I-N-G-E-R. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it. My name is Inger Jufrida, that's I-N-G-E-R, and my last name is G-I-U-F-F-R-I-D-A. And I am the Executive Director of Wildcare Oklahoma. We are the oldest and largest wildlife rehabilitation and education organization in the state, and one of the largest in the country in terms of the wildlife patient admissions and the people helped by our services. The Oklahoma Turnpike Authority's Access Oklahoma plans are destructive, callous, and backward-looking. To quote one of our board members, John Gifford, this plan is an assault on rural life and culture. It's an affront to individual freedom, and it threatens our land, our water, and our wildlife. The wildlife impacts of this proposed plan for building the Turnpike in Cleveland County and more toll roads and other locations are catastrophic for wildlife. The positioning of this turnpike in East Norman will destroy one of the most important wildlife corridors in central Oklahoma, cutting wildlife access off from Lake Thunderbird. It will negatively affect bald eagle nesting sites as well as those of other resident and migratory birds. It will negatively affect an important stop for tens of thousands of migratory birds that travel the central north-south flyway each spring and fall, and it will kill thousands of animals that seek the area around Lake Thunderbird, consisting of wetlands, forested areas, and fresh water. This plan will cause habitat destruction where the toll road will be built, habitat degradation on either side of the toll road, and habitat fragmentation. Wildlife will eventually be trapped in a desert bounded by I-35 to the west, I-240 to the north, of course Highway 9 to the south, and the proposed toll road running alongside Lake Thunderbird. The wildlife habitat destroyed is unique and disappearing. Cross timbers, grasslands, and wetlands. And no matter where this route is tweaked, if it runs along the west side of Lake Thunderbird, it will be disastrous for wildlife, some of which we know to be threatened and endangered. You would think this would have been considered by the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, but it was not. We are equally concerned with the watershed impacts of this toll road. The turnpike will create unprecedented pollution from vehicle traffic and petroleum and chemical-laden runoff directly into the Lake Thunderbird watershed, polluting drinking water for nearly 500,000 people and water that wildlife relies on equally. You know, yesterday was World Water Day, a day designated by the United Nations to call people to action to protect this precious resource, water. And it is ironic today that we are here to explain that building a toll road along this lake and through this watershed is a bad idea. In fact, it's a terrible idea. The amount of impervious surface created by this turnpike will prevent adequate recharge of the underground water table. Groundwater is replenished when rainfall is slowed down. This happens on pasture land, open spaces, in wetlands, and in tree-covered areas. Protection of this vital watershed is one of the key reasons East Norman has been zoned to prevent homesteads on anything less than 10 acres. So lack of groundwater will lead to increased wildfires, which is going to be disastrous for humans, livestock, and wildlife, and eventually dry wells no matter how deep they are dug. The proposed toll road itself runs about half a mile from the front of Wildcare, at this point at least, and the organization that has served the state for nearly 4 years, the result of thousands of people's time, commitment, passion, and financial investments. The proximity of this toll road may make the location untenable for the work that we do by the added noise, pollution, and light. These are all detrimental to wildlife. But make no mistake, while we're here to speak for wildlife and their habitats, we are equally concerned about the impacts of this project characterized as having minimal human impact. That is false. Thousands of people will have their homes needlessly destroyed, become displaced, and or lose investments in their homes and properties. Euphemistically referred to by the OTA and the engineering firm that they have contracted to manage this project as rooftops, these people's lives will be turned upside down to slightly improve commute times and travel time reliability. Of course, they claim safety too. However, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration determines speed, people not wearing seatbelts, and driving under the influence to be the most prevalent causes of highway fatalities. The Turnpike addresses none of these causes. 2020 saw the highest number of fatalities on the road since 2007, yet the OTA increased the speed limit throughout the Turnpike system that year. These claims about safety seem spurious. Finally, when we moved to Oklahoma 18 years ago, I was moved by people singing Oklahoma at public gatherings, and one line in particular stood out to me. We know we belong to the land, and the land we belong to is grand. Let's protect this grand land and stop building more toll roads. Let's use 21st century knowledge and technology and consider things like HOV lanes, improved bus routes, light rail, and even bicycle lanes. Using strategy from the 1950s to solve problems in 2020 and beyond seems intentionally ignorant. We know better, and we can do better. Let's protect the land that we love, the wildlife that roam it, the water we rely on, and the people that have made their lives in these wonderful places in Oklahoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Inger. Our next speaker is Dr. Amy Serrato, licensed professional civil engineer and current professor at OU. Her home is also directly in the path of the south extension of the proposed turnpike, and she is here to discuss Oklahoma's rare geologic formations known as rose rocks and the environmental hazards this turnpike poses to Norman, Del City, Midwest City, and their drinking water from Lake Thunderbird, the watershed, and the Garber-Wellington Aquifer. Please welcome Dr. Serrato.
Hello, my name is Amy Serrato. That's A-M-Y-C-E-R-A-T-O. And I'm a professional civil engineer in the state of Oklahoma with a specialty in geotechnical engineering, which is working with anything that's built with rock and soil, through rock and soil, and on rock and soil. And I'm very concerned about these turnpikes. Not only am I concerned about the turnpikes through Norman, the south extension and the east-west extension, but I'm concerned with the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority's overreach throughout the entire state. And as was said, I live directly in the path of the southern extension. So let's talk about the watershed first. Portions of the proposed east-west and southern extensions run directly through the inflow side of the Lake Thunderbird watershed area. The turnpike will have to cross more than a dozen stream crossings and wetland areas, including 2 wildlife management areas on Bureau of Reclamation land. These areas are very environmentally sensitive. Almost anything we do to alter the natural landscape will affect the environment, especially within a watershed. It will negatively impact the water, potentially forever, and our wildlife. Water that would normally soak in or infiltrate through an open pasture land or a wetland now runs off a large built impervious surface, in many cases elevated surfaces, picking up those pollutants from the traffic loads and transferring them to our ecosystem. There are several pollutants that we can never get out of our environment. They would be there forever, making Norman and the surrounding towns have to go somewhere else for their drinking water. This is not hyperbole. This would actually happen. Streams carrying these pollutants would flow into our lake, which is the drinking water source for Del City, Midwest City, and Norman. The Lake Thunderbird watershed must be protected at all costs. It is not okay just to shift this route 1 to 2 miles. It must go to the downstream side, away from the watershed, to protect all of our water. Not only will the turnpike route decimate Lake Thunderbird's watershed, it will also decimate our Garber-Wellington Aquifer, which is where most of us that live in East Norman get our drinking water from. Once those pollutants get into that aquifer, they can move in a lateral direction and pollute all of those existing water wells. We cannot allow OTA to build on the Garber-Wellington or through our Lake Thunderbird watershed. So the surface runoff that doesn't make it directly to the lake soaks through our soil and recharges that Garber-Wellington so our wells can pump our water for use. If these contaminants make it into the Garber-Wellington, Norman is in serious trouble. Without access to clean drinking water, our community cannot be sustained, because the health of a community is directly linked to access to clean drinking water. The Oklahoma Turnpike Authority is threatening to jeopardize the safety of our drinking water and our way of life forever. This pollution from the elevated turnpike, 6-lane concrete bridge deck that will have to span many miles of this turnpike, will forever impact the water quality of Lake Thunderbird and the Garber-Wellington aquifer. The state of Oklahoma and all of the environmental regulatory agencies along the city, with the city of Norman, Del City, and Midwest City, must demand that the OTA move their proposed route out of the Lake Thunderbird watershed. And furthermore, if this project continues inside of the watershed but through the Garber-Wellington aquifer, it is imperative that the OTA be forced to determine and execute a transparent and viable plan on how they will mitigate and remedy the damages of construction and stormwater runoff that will forever poison the Garber-Wellington aquifer. Not only do these proposed routes impact our drinking and groundwater sources, but they will destroy a rare geologic formation that makes our small part of this planet so special. Barite roses are distinctly Oklahoma. Our state rock since 1967, these exquisite natural wonders are found only one place on Earth, in a thin band between Lake Stanley Draper and Noble. Their occurrence is very localized. The rich barite rose zone in the vicinity of Lake Thunderbird and Noble is an area of ongoing study and is extensively used for educational purposes. These rose rocks are cherished by Oklahomans and mineral and rock enthusiasts from around the world. If the only existing vein in the world of barite rose rocks is paved over by the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, the city of Noble would lose its designation as the rose rock capital of the world and lose its main tourism draw. Rock hounding tourism would decrease, educational, engineering, geology field trips would stop, and we would forever lose these wonderful outcrops bearing our state rock and national treasure. The citizens of Oklahoma, together with our elected officials, must hold the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority accountable in preserving these rare geologic formations. You can help make our state rock a recognized protected geoheritage and national heritage area and stop the OTA from destroying these amazing barite rose rocks forever.
I am very pleased today to introduce Stan Ward. He's a native of Oklahoma, raised and educated here in Oklahoma, and he's earned a law degree and practiced law in California for about 13 years and moved back. He served as an OU General Counsel and has continued to practice law up until retiring this last July. His home is in the direct path of the proposed south extension, and he's now unretiring to help stop OTA's overreach and save all of our homes. Mr. Ward?
Well, retirement is not all it's made up to be. Let me assure you of that. When this project came to my attention, my wife came screaming into the bedroom and said, "There's a picture in the paper that says 8001 Etowah Road is where the new Turnpike Exchange is going to occasion. That just happens to be our address." And that was the very first notice that we had of this project. A wise man once said, "There's a big difference between reasons that sound good and good sound reasons." This turnpike sounds terrible, and there's no sound reason for its justification. So you start with this proposition. Somehow the fancy label of Access Oklahoma got tagged onto the project. I call it Appropriate Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, like most places, property rights are cherished. And people move to the country for a specific reason. They want the solitude, they want the separation, they want to get away from this hubbub world that we find ourselves in on a daily basis. It is a lifestyle choice, and people choose it deliberately, and they choose it for good, sound reasons. So you look at this situation and say, well, who are the people who are really pushing this project? Who are its promoters and profiteers? And then that raises this question before I get to those persons. How sound is a project when you have secreted the project from the public? State government is supposed to be open, it's supposed to be accessible, it is supposed to be a government of the people where the sun shines on the business of the government. It fails in every one of those categories. As we've already heard, it's going to be destructive to the wildlife, and that's a very important area, and we've dedicated 160 acres to wild care release. So, you know, you have these propositions that people choose property in the country for specific reasons. And to see the wild deer, the turkey, the coyotes, the eagles, the owls, and you name it, we've got it out there. And when we moved out there, we were told that you're part of the Lake Thunderbird watershed. And the city of Norman pulled the first maneuver to devalue my property by saying that you can't develop more than 10 acres or less than 10 acres. So they have imposed limitations, and now we have people that not only want to limit, but they want to take the property as well. So we know that this project was done without much thorough thought or planning, even though its proponents will tell you to the contrary. We also know that rose rocks are important, and Amy pointed this out, and we've got a huge vein of rose rock on our property. One of the pieces stands up just about as tall as that curtain. It's an amazing piece of rose rock, and it's an amazing area that needs to be preserved, for not just for the Ward family, but for posterity. And that's what we're looking to do, is to try to present this in such a way that the public is going to be able to enjoy this property for generations. Because after all, what is a property owner? You only have a life estate. You're just a guardian and a caretaker. And so what we want you to do is to be good stewards of your property. And I think that's what most people in the rural areas are, as they're fine stewards of the property. So if you go on down the line and you look at the other issues, was there an appropriate study made? Did anyone do a study of the environmental impact? If it's been done, has it been shared with any of you folks? So that would be a step in the right direction to see what is the total impact of this study on the entirety of the properties that are going to be adversely affected. We also know this: just because your property is taken doesn't mean that you're the only ones adversely impacted. Do you want to live next door to the turnpike? Do you want the pollution? Do you want the noise? Do you want the trash and the debris that turnpikes will bring to your area? And I think the answer is a resounding no. I could go on to say that there are many other factors that have not been considered, but I want to turn briefly to who are these persons that are going to benefit by this project. Well, let's start with the project engineers and the acquisition right-of-way people who come out and negotiate with you to try to get your property without going through an eminent domain process. And let's then move on to the land acquisition firms that represent all of these folks, the bond lawyers, the bond consultants. Have we stopped there? Oh no, there's a bunch more that profit from it. Wall Street speculators and investors. Now we have other people that are going to get in on this act. And who are they? Well, we have heavy equipment operators, road contractors, and last but not least, the politicians. So how does it come back around to politicians? It's called donations. So all of you folks need to go down and check with the Ethics Commission and see who's giving these contributions to the politicians who are supporting these types of projects. We know that there's only 2 or 3 turnpikes that are self-sustaining in the state of Oklahoma. And does it make any sense from a feasibility impact study to have more turnpikes, more losses, so you weigh on these giant scales property rights, lifestyle, and ownership of property without being forced to sell it versus people who are going to profit by a turnpike system that does not make economic sense. The games that are played to make it look sensible get right back to where I started. There's a difference between reasons that sound good and good sound reasons. We're into this fight for the duration. We intend to be heard, and we intend to fight the good fight, and we know that the court process is available, and we also know of the pros and cons of accessing the court system to come to a favorable result. It will not be swift, it will not be cheap, but it will be enduring. And I think everyone in this room that's here in support of stopping the turnpike understands and realizes the importance to buckle down, gird your loins for battle, as the Bible says, and take the mighty armor of God forward and try to say, put a brake on this whole project. We've had enough. And we have had enough of being trotted upon by politicians who don't think that we're smart enough to see through them and to understand who they are that are making the money from this type of a project. So to save 20 minutes, is it worth destroying over 600 properties? And I think everyone in this room knows the answer. It's not only no, it's hell no. Thank you.
This is not a Democratic issue. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a partisan issue. This is a people issue.
Dozens of Pike Off OTA protesters making noise inside the state capitol Tuesday. Clearly heard by Norman Senator Rob Standridge.
But this is a very large, very bold, as OTA will tell you, project.
Today, Standridge pushing through a last-minute bill requesting the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority complete a feasibility study, essentially requiring OTA to clarify their reasoning for the selected South Extension route.
It simply requires OTA do some appropriate studies and make sure that that decision is thoroughly thought out.
OTA would file the report for lawmakers at least 180 days prior to issuing bonds for the construction. In it, the answers to questions like, is this the most effective route? What other routes were considered, and why weren't other routes chosen? All of which OTA spokesperson Jessica Brown says the agency will have no issues answering.
This really mirrors what we're already doing.
The current route found on the state's Access Oklahoma website runs 1,200 feet wide. A year from now, OTA plans to narrow it down to about half that. But for the most part, what you see is what you'll get.
There are so many cars, vehicles traveling on I-35. We have to find a reliever route. And we believe through all the information we have, this is that route.
Meanwhile, information they still don't have that this bill would require them to report what the environmental effects will be, as well as how many people will be displaced and how many homes will be destroyed.
I would assume that you would have at least an estimate of how many homes would be impacted.
No, we don't have an estimate. We haven't gone in there to look at that because it's premature.
You said that you guys picked this path with how many homes would be impacted in mind. But if you have no idea, can't even estimate how many homes will be impacted, then how could you have considered that?
We looked at areas that had the least amount of homes and businesses that we could draw that line to, that would be least impactful. We didn't go in and count.
How many homes do you think would be too many homes?
I don't think there is an estimate or there is a number for too many homes.
Brown says OTA considered expanding I-35, State Highway 9, and the east side of Lake Thunderbird instead. However, she's adamant this is the only viable option.
And I don't have a lot of detail for you, except that, again, we looked at these areas.
And in response to Norman City Council recently voting unanimously to formally oppose the new expansion plan,
You are opposing the OTA.
And we're going to fight this together.
Brown says OTA remains confident they're headed down the right road.
We have to think beyond one city. We have to think beyond one household. We have to look at a big picture.
Now that bill passed as an emergency today, meaning it heads straight to the governor's desk for approval. I asked his office whether he plans on signing it or not, but as of news time tonight, I have not heard back. Reporting live in Oklahoma City, Rebecca Pryor, Fox 25 News. How many homes would be impacted?
No, we don't have an estimate.
One of the main concerns Oklahomans have with the Access Oklahoma project is how many homes the new expansion plan would destroy. In an interview with Fox 25 yesterday, Oklahoma Turnpike officials were unable to answer that question. In fact, they claim they can't even estimate the impacts on private properties right now. However, Fox 25's Rebecca Pryor discovered new documents today that might suggest otherwise. Rebecca.
Wendy, while the OTA claims they have absolutely no idea how many homes will be lost or when those homeowners will be forced to leave, today I learned the agency is already working to hire consultants to do just that.
Even though the route for Access Oklahoma's South Extension has essentially already been chosen.
There's wiggle room, but it's not going to be drastically different.
Correct.
OTA spokesperson Jessica Brown claims they're still incapable of providing any estimate for how many properties this path will pave over.
It does not serve what we're doing to go in there and count possibly impacted homes.
However, documents discovered by Fox 25 revealing the OTA is actively looking to hire firms for right-of-way services, which includes identifying, appraising, and buying property for transportation purposes. The document also references a request for proposal, or an RFP. Fox 25 requested that RFP from the OTA, but they were unable to send it before news time. Still, a quick search for similar files shows RFPs can be incredibly descriptive and detailed. This one for a road project out of Colorado runs 40 pages long and gives an exact estimate for how many homes will be impacted. When asked how the OTA could be starting the process of buying up private property without knowing how many homes they're going to buy, the OTA said they were, quote, hiring consultants for right-of-way so they will be able to speak at upcoming town halls, in addition to being a part of the right-of-way process after the preliminary design and environmental phases are complete. The OTA says that will likely take about a year. Now, as for when the agency plans on telling Oklahomans how many homes this project will cost, that might come as a knock on your door.
When we draw that path, we will contact those property owners and let them know.
So OTA is never going to give an estimate. They're just going to tell people when they have to leave.
When we know who's going to be affected, then we will contact those individuals.
Now, some Norman residents are estimating anywhere from 600 to 800 homes might be lost. I asked OTA if that was an accurate estimate, but OTA couldn't say one way or the other. Instead, they doubled down, saying no estimates exist.
Turmoil being caused by a planned turnpike extension in our state.
And folks are not happy. Many worried they're going to lose their homes because of the plan.
Those folks taking their concerns to a public transportation meeting today. News 4's Ashley Moss was there and she joins us live. Ashley.
OTA is saying they're ready to connect with the community about their concerns, but opponents making a bold statement at today's gathering, saying the justifications for this big project don't exist and the impact could be disastrous.
But he's not answering my question. I'm just an Oklahoma citizen whose home is being taken.
Outraged Oklahomans standing before transportation officials Tuesday, calling them to account for what they say is turning out to be a disastrous future plan for highway infrastructure and expansion in the state.
Why these routes? They make no economic sense. They make no environmental sense. The proposed routes are geologically destructive. The proposed routes are a disaster in terms of human impacts.
Opponents hoping their presence at Tuesday's meeting will at least help delay the program from moving forward before proper environmental, humanitarian, and economic studies are done.
Why would OTA run the risk of having to pay an additional $60 million to re-engineer the routes if the environmental assessment reports could potentially come back with significant impacts?
I am asking you to put the brakes on this project.
Transportation Secretary Tim Gantz saying the time, land, and money for the transportation system was a necessary and long-term solution.
We don't have the tax-supported resources to fill in those gaps. And the Turnpike Authority has done that very effectively.
Also saying, yes, routes have been selected, but they're not etched in stone.
We did our best to understand where the locations were going to be just so we could begin the discussion.
Up next, Oklahomans who oppose those turnpikes gathering support with a letter they hope to present next week to the Council of Bond Oversight, asking them to decline OTA's request for interim finances for the Access Oklahoma program until those additional impact studies and surveys are completed.
A lot of questions tonight from city leaders, but even more concerns. OTA getting an earful on just how unhappy Norman is with the Turnpike they say they didn't ask for.
To blindside us like this and then act like you're playing nice is a load of crap, and I'm not down for it.
Last week, Norman City Council approved a resolution against the Turnpike. This week, the Turnpike taking over the council meeting again.
You're asking for our residents in Ward 5 to give up property, livelihood, memories, birth, deaths, funerals, everything that makes a home.
OTA taking some heat from city leaders, as many there were upset they weren't notified of the Turnpike earlier.
The whole process just seemed gross when you're going to change our whole landscape of our city.
Or outraged the Turnpike is proposed at all.
And I don't understand how you guys as an authority in our state could come and do this when it was voted against being done in our city in 1999.
OTA says traffic on I-35 will double in 30 years. They believe the best way to relieve heavy congestion and travel time is to expand the Turnpike.
What we are trying to do is provide a long-range look at what Oklahoma needs to solve a major issue that's occurring on I-35 and that we know is going to grow on the west side of Norman.
But councilmen say the travel time saved isn't worth the cost of homes lost.
It seems like we're taking advantage. It seems like the system is taking advantage of them with no recourse. So do we tie ourselves to a tree?
This house is one of hundreds in the path of the new proposed turnpike that'll cut through Norman. Angry residents say they plan to continue to fight, and the fight won't be over until they win.
We are going to succeed. We're going to make it very difficult for the OTA over the next few years. We vow to fight until the end because they need to be held accountable.
Amy Serrato has lived in Norman for almost 2 decades, building a home and raising a family.
You never would envision. This was never on my long-range plan.
Now she's fighting to keep her home and, as an engineer, spends hours researching the proposed turnpike. Serrato says the southern route would require an elevated bridge deck to avoid harming miles of environmentally sensitive areas.
Elevated bridge decks are very expensive. They're very noisy. They let pollution run off into the lake much easier. They have light pollution. They bring everything up. So it would ruin East Norman forever.
Not giving up until she hears these words.
We're done with Norman. We're going to move on till they stop and realize that there are other places in the state that their roadways would be more welcome because they're not welcome in Norman.
OTA says they're conducting environmental studies in the area and that should be completed by early 2023. Elise Jones, KOCO 5 News.
Norman does not want this turnpike.
For weeks now, we've been covering the OTA's plan to expand the state's turnpike system. Tonight, Fox 25's Rebecca Pryor unearths the latest stone being thrown. She's got your back with why some are convinced a rare rock could put a stop to the state's south extension.
Hunting for hidden gems.
I don't see them right here.
These days, anywhere from 40 to 50 hours a week, you'll find OU professor and geotechnical engineer Amy Serrato digging in the dirt.
I would say they're even rarer than diamonds.
Ever since state turnpike officials proposed the South Extension, a 19-mile stretch slated to run west of Lake Thunderbird, Serrato's been tracking down and mapping these yellow markers, showing all the spots you can find Oklahoma's rarest rose. That's actually a rock. rock.
They occur only one place in the world.
The barite rose, better known as rose rocks, come in all shapes and sizes, and in 1968 were officially named the State Rock of Oklahoma.
We would love to preserve these for future generations because once we destroy them, they will never reform.
Rosettes form from sandstone, called that because it's basically just sand. Now, sandstone forms pretty much all over the state, but rose rocks, they only exist within a 1 to 2 mile band between Stanley Draper and Noble, which is why Serrato says if the OTA gets their way,
we're going to forever pave over and crush our geologic wonder. It would decimate the rose rocks.
It's something she adds could have been caught if the state's environmental impact studies were performed before the Turnpike's path was picked.
A lot of people don't understand why we're waiting until now to do environmental studies.
OTA spokesperson Jessica Brown acknowledging many fear this $5 billion project is being done backwards, and Brown's only justification for why the environmental consequences aren't considered sooner.
That's the way the Turnpike has been building turnpikes since the early 50s, and it's worked really well.
But Serrato couldn't disagree more.
This project is extremely mismanaged. They do not know what they're doing from a civil engineering perspective.
She's now in the process of federally protecting rose rocks by labeling the area as a geoheritage site.
We're working really hard with the Oklahoma Geologic Survey and the state geologists to help us achieve that designation.
It's a plan she thinks could be rock solid in time for summer. And even if it's not, she still is.
I am extraordinarily stubborn, and I'm extraordinarily passionate about saving the environment for my children and my community.
Rebecca Pryor.
I'm very confident that we'll be able to stop the OTA.
Fox 25 News.
There's been a lot of pushback over this turnpike that could go through the Norman area. This morning, lawmakers looking for answers about the proposal again, where it would go through 2 portions of Norman.
News 9's Colby Thielen live at the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority this morning with what the state legislature is now asking of the OTA. Colby?
Hey, good morning. They really want to take a deeper dive into this proposed plan. While there are many Cleveland County residents that would like to see it stopped altogether, a group of lawmakers is now just looking to see if this is in fact the best option and how OTA decided on it. Keep in mind this turnpike expansion affects Cleveland County in 2 primary ways. The first would be that east-west connector. It goes from the Newcastle area out to Franklin. But it was a different part of this plan that got written into legislation. The south extension. That would extend the Kickapoo Turnpike down to I-35 near Purcell. It would run right past Lake Thunderbird and right through Norman's rural 5th District. Norman Senator Rob Standridge brought an amendment to Senate Bill 1610 that would require a study from the OTA. It would look into many questions, the first being what was considered when proposing the route. It also seeks information as to why this route is the most effective regarding the flow of traffic, the specific impact, the effect that it would have on this on businesses there, on citizens, on private and public property. And finally, it asks if any alternate routes were proposed. Now, keep in mind, this 15-year plan is still in the very early stages, but has received a lot of pushback from Cleveland County residents, even from the Norman City Council itself. Senate Bill 1610, by the way, meanwhile, will be going to the House. We'll be following the progress. We'll keep you posted with all the updates. At OTA, Colby Thielen, Oklahoma's Own, News 9.
A lot of questions tonight from city leaders, but even more concerns. OTA getting an earful on just how unhappy Norman is with the turnpike they say they didn't ask for.
To blindside us like this and then act like you're playing nice is a load of crap, and I'm not down for it.
Last week, Norman City Council approved a resolution against the turnpike. This week, the turnpike taking over the council meeting again.
You're asking for our residents in Ward 5 to give up property, livelihood, memories, birth, deaths, funerals, everything that makes a home.
OTA taking some heat from city leaders, as many there were upset they weren't notified of the turnpike earlier.
The whole process just seems gross when you're going to change our whole landscape of our city.
Or outraged the turnpike is proposed at all.
And I don't understand how you guys as an authority in our state could come and do this when it was voted against being done in our city in 1999.
OTA says traffic on I-35 will double in 30 years. They believe the best way to relieve heavy congestion and travel time is to expand the Turnpike.
What we are trying to do is provide a long-range look at what Oklahoma needs to solve a major issue that's occurring on I-35 and that we know is going to grow on the west side of Norman.
But councilmen say the travel time saved isn't worth the cost of homes lost.
It seems like we're taking advantage. It seems like the system is taking advantage of them with no recourse. So do we tie ourselves to a tree?
$5 billion Turnpike expansion plan could potentially displace hundreds of residents. We've been following the Turnpike Authority's plan and have been looking into just how far along those plans are. News 9's Erica Lee once again has the latest.
Norman residents gathered at the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority meeting this morning, voicing their concerns about the expansion project. Residents spoke up from both the audience,
where are the people in Oklahoma supposed to live,
as well as during scheduled public comment, citing both environmental and residential concerns.
The proposed routes make no engineering sense. They make no economic sense. They make no environmental sense. The proposed routes are geologically destructive. The proposed routes are a disaster in terms of human impacts.
The civil engineer also says the proposed routes would impact 5 times more families than any other turnpike in Oklahoma history.
The citizens of Norman do not want these turnpikes.
She ended the meeting by passing out a rare rose rock to each board member, stating that the turnpike routes would destroy the area full of rare geological rose rock formations. The OTA board said they appreciate the feedback and that they will continue to work with the public to minimize impact. Secretary Tim Gatz says OTA has not notified any potentially affected property owners at this time. He also clarified that while they have hired contractors, they haven't purchased any properties.
When you see the Turnpike Authority hiring consultants, one of the things that's unique is they don't staff right-of-way acquisition experts. And it takes time to assemble those resources, and that's the process that we're undertaking right now.
The Turnpike Authority says they're open to continue conversation and that they will hold additional meetings in mid-April in Moore, Newcastle, Norman, and Noble. Reporting in Oklahoma City, Erica Lee, Oklahoma Zone, News 9.
This house is one of hundreds in the path of the new proposed turnpike that'll cut through Norman. Angry residents say they plan to continue to fight, and the fight won't be over until they win.
We are going to succeed. We're going to make it very difficult for the OTA over the next few years. We vow to fight until the end because they need to be held accountable.
Amy Serrato has lived in Norman for almost 2 decades, building a home and raising a family.
You never would envision. This was never on my long-range plan.
Now she's fighting to keep her home and, as an engineer, spends hours researching the proposed turnpike. Serrato says the southern route would require an elevated bridge deck to avoid harming miles of environmentally sensitive areas.
Elevated bridge decks are very expensive. They're very noisy. They let pollution run off into the lake much easier. They have light pollution. They bring everything up. So it would ruin East Norman forever.
Not giving up until she hears these words.
We're done with Norman. We're going to move on till they stop and realize that there are other places in the state that their roadways would be more welcome because they're not welcome in Norman.
OTA says they're conducting environmental studies in the area, and that should be completed by early 2023. Elise Jones, KOCO 5 News.
Meanwhile, Turnpike turmoil continues in Norman. For the first time since being introduced, we're now getting a better look at a $5 billion plan that could also come at the cost of at least 60 homes. You'll remember the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority proposing a new turnpike along Indian Hills Road connecting Newcastle to Norman. They're also wanting to extend the Kickapoo to Purcell. News 4's Kaitor K with more from tonight's council meeting. And Kaitor, for the first time, we understand the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority was there at the meeting.
Yes, tonight the OTA apologized to the Norman Council for how this Turnpike announcement unfolded, that they didn't first meet with the council before announcing it. And though the OTA took 3 hours of questions tonight, the council says they learned very little.
To blindside us like this and then act like you're playing nice is a load of crap, and I'm not down for it.
Norman City Council getting aggressive with the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority Tuesday night, frustrated that the agency has not actively included residents' input in their proposal for a new turnpike. Council demanded to know how many homes will be affected. Here's a response from OTA Deputy Director Joe E. Kelly.
We've been pressed on, can you give us an estimate of the number of homes? And we have said we can't possibly give an estimate when we don't know what the alignment is exactly.
The answer, not enough for residents in attendance.
They didn't give us a number, and they won't give us a number. They won't even give us a minimum, like, hey, it could minimally affect this people, and then maximally affect this people. They won't give us anything because they don't care.
Mayor Bria Clark accusing the OTA of reverse engineering their plans without having fully done their research on economic and environmental impact first.
They're now gathering information, they're now doing the studies, and how could you decide on a path without having that information? And the fact that they're putting people last is just unacceptable, and Oklahomans deserve better.
She worries that in the end, the OTA might just make their turnpike decisions without seriously considering the people.
They do have that power, but Governor Stitt also has the power to stop it. So I'm calling on him to listen to Oklahomans and do what's right and save their homes.
The OTA tells us their next step is to meet directly with the public. They have 4 meetings planned, with the first one on April 14th at Noble High School. In Norman, Kiter K, Oklahoma's News 4.
Meanwhile, Turnpike turmoil continues in Norman. For the first time since being introduced, we're now getting a better look at a $5 billion plan that could also come at the cost of at least 60 homes. You'll remember the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority proposing a new turnpike along Indian Hills Road connecting Newcastle to Norman. They're also wanting to extend the Kickapoo to Purcell. News 4's Kiter K with more from tonight's council meeting. And Kiter, for the first time, we understand the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority was there at the meeting.
Yes, tonight the OTA apologized to the Norman Council for how this turnpike announcement unfolded, that they didn't first meet with the council before announcing it. And though the OTA took 3 hours of questions tonight, the council says they learned very little.
To blindside us like this and then act like you're playing nice is a load of crap, and I'm not down for it.
Norman City Council getting aggressive with the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority Tuesday night, frustrated that the agency has not actively included residents' input in their proposal for a new turnpike. Council demanded to know how many homes will be affected. Here's a response from OTA Deputy Director Joe E. Kelly.
We've been pressed on, can you give us an estimate of the number of homes? And we have said we can't possibly give an estimate when we don't know what the alignment is exactly.
The answer, not enough for residents in attendance.
They didn't give us a number, and they won't give us a number. They won't even give us a minimum, like, hey, it could minimally affect this people, and then maximally affect this people. They won't give us anything because they don't care.
Mayor Bria Clark accusing the OTA of reverse engineering their plans without having fully done their research on economic and environmental impact first.
They're now gathering information, they're now doing the studies, and how could you decide on a path without having that information? And the fact that they're putting people last is just unacceptable, and Oklahomans deserve better.
She worries that in the end, the OTA might just make their turnpike decisions without seriously considering the people.
They do have that power, but Governor Stitt also has the power to stop it. So I'm calling on him to listen to Oklahomans and do what's right and save their homes.
The OTA tells us their next step is to meet directly with the public. They have 4 meetings planned, with the first one on April 14th at Noble High School. In Norman, Kiter K, Oklahoma's News 4.
Republican Party's 2020 platform opposing eminent domain for Turnpike expansion. But is that still the case?
If we can't take someone at their word, what can we take them at?
And that is where we begin here at 6. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Ogle.
And I'm Jolene Cheney. That platform has a lot of people wondering why some leaders, including the governor, seem to be on board with the planned expansion.
News 4's Natalie Clydesdale is joining us here in studio with more on this. What'd you find out, Natalie?
Yeah, the outrage over the planned turnpike continues. Now, Norman residents are pointing out that using eminent domain to build and operate toll roads goes against what the Republican Party campaigned on.
This is a very emotional thing when you talk about destroying people's homes, hopes, and dreams.
More outrage over the proposed turnpike expansion project.
My head wants to explode.
The proposed project would add 3 new turnpikes to the South Metro area, one near Will Rogers Airport, one through Moore, and another through Norman, and could impact hundreds of homes in the process.
It's a big deal.
Oklahoma's governor publicly on board with the plan.
Part of our method of showing Oklahomans we're open for business is investing in infrastructure, and this is a super exciting announcement for the state of Oklahoma.
The most recent version of the GOP's principles says, quote, "We oppose public-private partnerships and the use of eminent domain to build and operate toll roads and bridges."
We support a moratorium on the creation of additional turnpikes. How about that? This is the platform that Governor Stitt campaigned on to get elected.
Which is only adding fuel to the residents' anger.
If we can't take someone at their word, what can we take them at?
The Oklahoma Republican Party was not available for an interview Thursday, but sent News 4 a statement saying in part, quote, "At the state Republican Party, we must promote and adhere to the state party platform and values. That said, members within the Republican Party understandably have varying opinions on this matter." And now Norman's mayor pleading the governor to take action.
Governor Stitt also has the power to stop it, so I'm calling on him to listen to Oklahomans and do what's right and save their homes.
We also reached out to the governor's office twice today and have not heard back.